It's 8:30. 8:30.
It's 8:30 New York time. Time to wake up, America, and stump the experts. Each week at this time, Lucky Strike sets up a panel of 4 experts willing and able to take on all questions. For every question used, Lucky Strike will reward you with $10 in defense stamps. If the question is muffed, you get a total of a $50 defense bond plus the 24-volume set of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Send your questions to Information Please, 480 Lexington Avenue, New York City. If our editorial staff edits your questions a bit, don't fret over it. In case of similarity, we'll have to be sole judge of who shall be paid, and all questions become the property of Information Please. Now light up a Lucky Strike as I present our Master of Ceremonies, book reviewer of the New Yorker magazine, Clifton Fadiman. Mr. Fadiman.
Ladies and gentlemen, Information Please continues as before, a completely impromptu and spontaneous program. Tonight, our massive intellect consists of our 2 regulars, Franklin P. Adams and John Kieran, and to make up the quartet, we introduce our old friend Jan Struther, creator of Mrs. Miniver, and one of the world's great biologists, a worthy bearer of a great name, Julian Huxley. I might mention, by the way, that over in London they have an Information Please, too, which they call the Brain Trust. And it's true, Mr. Huxley, that you're one of the regular members of the Brain Trust.
That's right.
Do you see any difference between the way in which we run our Brain Trust and the way in which you run yours over there so far?
Well, I gather that we do more discussion and you have more straight questions.
Well, we'll see. We may give you a chance to do some discussion before the evening is very much older. We'll begin, Mr. Huxley, with a rather funereal question, if that's all right with you, coming to us from Mrs. Joseph M. Bryan of Everglades, Florida. From your knowledge of familiar songs, tell me who rested in the following ways. Who rested in the old churchyard? In the old churchyard. This is a burial question. Mr. Kieran.
The old churchyard in a corner, something in a lone, Sweet Alice. Lies under the stone.
That's correct, yes. Very good. And who was being informed of that fact in the old song?
Ben Bolt.
Ben Bolt, yes. In the old churchyard in the valley, Ben Bolt.
By Thomas Dunn English.
By Thomas Dunn English is right. How about someone who rested over the sea in an old song? Miss Struther.
My bonnet.
My bonnet, yes. And who rested by thy murmuring stream? By thy murmuring stream. Mr. Kieran.
My Mary.
My Mary, yes. Can you give us the
Sleep
line?
by thy flow gently, sweet afton, among thy green braes.
Yes. Now, Mr. Huxley, how would you discuss a thing like that? You see? I'm afraid we're much more simple over here than you are over there. Finally, who rested in the billowy wave? In the billowy wave. Mr. Adams.
Titwillow.
Yes. First name? Tom. Oh, wasn't it Tom Tit?
A little Tom Tit.
Yes. First name Tom, last name Titwillow. Quite right. What is the line that would give us his final resting place? Can you remember it?
And he... something, sigh and something and a gurgle he gave, and he flung himself into the billowy wave.
Yes, that's approximately it. Plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. And so,
Titwillow, Titwillow, Titwillow.
Yes, that was Mr. Adams' solo. Here's one from Frank L. Martin of Arlington, Virginia. Now, let us suppose that 3 male admirers are courting their girls, and these girls are all girls in the animal kingdom. They are not human. The first one waves a large claw in the air. The second offered a package of food as part of his courting. And the third showed his intended building material. Who in each case would be doing the courting? Mr. Huxley.
First would be a fiddler crab.
What would he be doing again?
He'd be waving his large colored claw in the air.
Yes.
There's one large one and one small one.
He keeps the small one hidden?
He keeps the small one to eat with. The female has 2 small ones.
And no large one?
No large one.
And what does the female fiddler crab do when she sees this large claw being waved at her? Does she wave back?
No. She keeps it to herself, but sometimes she gives in.
I see. You've apparently watched this sort of thing going on in the course of your career. The fiddler crab is right. What's the female of the fiddler crab called, by the way? Is there is she called a fiddler crab, too?
That's right.
Very good. Now, how about the second, who offered a package of food? What?
That would be an
Mr. Huxley?
impid fly.
I beg pardon?
That would be a fly of the family Impidae.
Would be offering what?
Offering a packet of... He'd offer another insect wrapped up in a silken cocoon to his mate.
An insect smaller than himself. Must be a
Yeah.
very, very tiny one. And would the spider also offer food to his mate? Intended mate, shall we say?
Not generally, no.
Well, I don't... Over here on this white card, it says the spider does do that. I don't know. It says that the spider often carries a fly in a highly edible condition around to attract his,
Well,
his mate.
he may do it sometimes, but the impid flies do it regularly.
You have me there, Mr. Huxley. I'll bet that's true. The little impid flies. All right. Now, what the third would be showing building material to his sweetheart.
Well, quite a lot of birds do that. Penguins do that.
Penguins?
Yeah.
They do? What sort of building material do they offer?
Stones.
Really? That's a fine thing to offer. Stone.
And there was a man who studied the penguins in the Antarctic, and the penguins, they don't always restrict themselves to their mates. When anything interesting strikes them, they go and offer stones to them. And he said he was so embarrassed the first time a male penguin offered him a stone.
Well, are these penguins who don't make any distinction, are they the more intelligent or the less intelligent penguins who offer these stones variously?
I think average intelligence.
Average intelligence? Well, very good, Mr. Huxley, on that. I see that you've spent your life to some advantage. Here's one from Mrs. M.C. Bowler of Minneapolis. I'm going to test your knowledge of some quotations. Who, according to a familiar quotation, was all tears, was all tears. That's all I'm going to give you in the way of a hint. Does it ring a bell? Mr. Huxley.
Niobe.
Very good, yes. It's, what's the source of the quotation? However, the answer is correct. Niobe. It's from the first soliloquy of Hamlet. He's describing his mother. Remember that, Mr. Kieran?
Yes, that's right.
A little month or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears. I think it's very good, Mr. Huxley, getting that. That's not too well known. Now, who, according to a familiar quotation, was all mimsy, M-I-M-S-Y, Miss Struther?
The Borogoves.
Ah, yes, the Borogoves. Mr. Huxley?
The Borogoves.
Beg your
Borogoves.
pardon.
Borogoves.
Borogoves, yes.
You shouldn't put in your R that way.
Very sorry.
All mimsy were the Borogoves, and the mome raths outgrave, of course, and that means, Miss Struther,
Pass that.
this is your chance to tell everybody what the line means. No one ever has discovered what it does mean. Who was all for one?
What's that?
Who were all for one? Mr. Adams.
Equity.
A very true and very good answer. Mr. Kieran, is there another?
Athos, Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan.
Yes, the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. It is the motto of equity, though, isn't it, Mr. Adams? Never,
So I've heard.
It never occurred to me. Very good. Finally, who was all forlorn? All forlorn. Mr. Huxley?
The milkmaid.
Yes, that's correct. This is the maiden, all forlorn, who milked the cow with the crumpled horn. Do you know why she was all forlorn, Mr. Huxley? Do you have any idea? Did it come to mind at all? I mean, this is one of those things you might want to discuss.
Because it
in
rhymes
the
with
English
horn.
language. Because it rhymes with horn. Yes, I should say. Discussion is very primitive over here. Nathan Fine of Brooklyn sends this one in. I think we ought to get all on this. What national organizations are now using these catch sentences on their advertising posters? These are slogans. Defend tomorrow today. Defend tomorrow today. Who's using that slogan? A very good one, and a very good organization that uses it. To wit, the Boy Scouts of America. The Boy Scouts of America, Mr. Struther and gentlemen. That's one wrong. Here's another. If you can't go, give. If you can't go, give. Mr. Adams.
Sounds like the USO.
No, it would be very appropriate.
Cross.
The Red Cross is right, Mr. Adams. Yes, the American Red Cross War Fund, particularly, is using that slogan now. You buy 'em, we'll fly 'em. You buy 'em, we'll fly 'em. Mr. Struther.
That's for defense bonds.
Yes, for the government defense bonds and stamps. Well, that sends one defense bond, a $50 one, to Mr. Fine, plus a set of the Britannica. and sends us on to this question from Daniel M. Kelleher, Jr. of Winthrop, Massachusetts. Who are these military men? They're all fictional characters. The first is, we'll begin with a private, Private Terence Mulvaney. Private, we have 4 hands on that. Miss Strother?
The character out of Kipling's stories about the 3 privates in the British Army.
Yes. What are those stories called? The whole collection.
Soldiers 3.
Yes. And who are the other 2?
Leroy
Very good.
and...
Mr. Kieran?
Stanley Ortheris.
Yes.
yes.
Leroy comes from what county, Miss Strother?
Yorkshire.
Yes. And Ortheris? Mr. Huxley?
From London.
Yes. Yes, he's a Cockney. Major Dobbin. Major Dobbin, Mr. Kieran.
Major Dobbin is the faithful friend in Vanity Fair.
Yes. Very good. Major General Stanley. Major General Stanley, Mr. Adams.
Major General Stanley is the man that sings a patter song in the Pirates of Penzance.
Very good. That's quite right. And Captain Gooding. Captain Gooding, Gooding, Mr. Adams.
Captain Gooding is the boy that was spoken to in perhaps in the first stanza of Yankee Doodle.
Yes, I don't know whether it's the first or not, but it's certainly one
Certainly
that most of us don't
close
know.
to the front.
That's right. Father and I went down to camp along with Captain Gooding, and there we see the men and boys as thick as hasty pudding. I don't think most of us remember that verse, Mr. Adams. I think it's very clever of you.
They do in my set.
That may be so. Edith Sorensen of Van Nest, New York, sends this one in. Get 3 out of 4. And it's going to be a musical question, Miss Strother and gentlemen. And each of these compositions that you hear played, there are going to be 4 of them in all, should suggest some scientific occupation. Let's see if they do. Mr. Kahn, let's have the first. Mr. Kieran.
A geologist.
Yes, why?
Rock of Ages.
Yes, very good. Rock of Ages, cleft for me, and so forth. Did that not occur to any of you other brilliant wits? Mr. Adams, it did?
Yes.
You just didn't want to say. I know how it is. Very well, let's have the second. Mr. Adams, you seem affronted.
Don't know what the tune is.
You don't know what that tune is?
No, sir.
Oh, a very familiar tune, Miss Strother.
I know the tune, but I don't know what it suggests. La cucaracha.
Yes, doesn't it suggest any kind of scientific occupation to you, Mr. Kieran?
An entomologist.
Yes, an entomologist.
Oh, yes,
Of course. La cucaracha, Mr. Huxley, this is more or less in your line.
Z cockroach.
Yes, the cockroach. of course. It's part of the province of an entomologist, isn't it, to know something about cockroaches? Not only entomologists. Very well, now the third. Shouldn't be surprised if we needed Mr. Levant here this evening on this one.
He would know that.
He wouldn't know that? You mean that's too familiar, Mr. Adams? Well, does
Even
it...
I don't know it.
Does it come to you, Mr. Kieran?
I don't know what the song is.
Well, it's Saint-Saëns, Danse Macabre.
Oh.
Well, and that would recall what sort of scientist, Mr.
An undertaker.
Well, yes, an undertaker, hardly a scientific occupation.
Anthropologist.
Yes, or an anatomist, let's say, having to do with skeletons. Well, that gives us one wrong. We have to get the next one right. Go ahead. Miss Strother?
Chiropodist.
Why do you say that?
The flat foot floozy with the Floyd fly.
Very good, and I congratulate you on your mastery of our language, Miss Strother. Well, now, so far, Lucky Strike has paid out just one $50 defense bond, and that means one set of the Britannica. Now, Mr. Cross, always a believer in order and logic, reminds us of the importance of putting first things first.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, in choosing a cigarette, it's of first importance to make sure of fine tobacco. For clearly, in a cigarette, it's the tobacco that counts. And that's why year after year at tobacco markets below the Mason-Dixon line, the makers of Lucky's consistently pay the price to get the milder, better-tasting leaf. For example, at auctions in Tabor City, North Carolina, season of 1939, the American Tobacco Company paid 30% more for the tobacco it bought for its cigarettes and other tobacco products. Yes, 30% above the average market price published by the United States Department of Agriculture. And that crop, properly